to talk about here today. So, when we're talking about mind control, essentially what we mean is the manipulation of human perception. This is ancient, dark psychology. This is dark occultism when you really boil it down. That's what the occult is. People don't really understand what the methodologies of the occult or mind control in particular are in a wider sense. That's why we do this show here. That's why we talk about these manipulation tactics, to know about how the mind can be manipulated and persuaded, and how the perceptions of it can be shaped and engineered, is critical. It is of paramount importance. It isn't negative. It's information. What we do with information imbues it with either positive energy or negative energy. But information in and of itself is never negative. If we see how something is being used, manipulated, perverted, and used against us as a weapon, that isn't necessarily negative. That can be empowering if we use that information to raise our awareness and protect ourselves against these methods. Well, like I said, we're going to be getting a little bit more abstract as the weeks and months go here on this radio show on what on earth is happening. Because what I'm going to begin doing, not necessarily in this show, but in future ones coming up, is starting to break down different occult schools of thought. And we're going to be exploring the symbolism of different occult schools. Essentially, what I'll be doing over the weeks to come is providing a form of initiation into the occult for some of the listeners of this show. And people may think, oh, that sounds scary. No, occult, as we've talked about on this show, simply means hidden knowledge. And if we're ignorant of some of this knowledge, we can be controlled through it. If we become aware of it, we begin to work with this information. We begin to assimilate it and understand it in depth. And in doing so, we begin to know ourselves better. We start to know the psyche better, our own psychological makeup and development. And as we move further into that path of initiation, if you will, it becomes much more difficult to pull the wool over one's eyes. It becomes much more difficult to manipulate someone that is in possession of that knowledge, because ultimately it's all knowledge of self. And that's why a dominator wants to hide that information. It wants to hide that knowledge, because if they have access to it and someone else doesn't, it's a piece of cake to manipulate their perceptions and what they think and what they feel. And that's what's going on this planet, folks. Whether you've recognized that or not by this time doesn't matter. It is happening. And I'm going to do my best to expose it until I can't do that anymore. So let's start our basic discussion tonight of time, what it is, how it is used to essentially manipulate the human population. How our system of time and timekeeping is basically set up on the earth, no matter where you are, is based upon physical movements. It's based upon the physical movements of bodies in the heavens. So this is going to eventually springboard off into a discussion about astrotheology, okay? And we will be talking about religion probably in 2 weeks or so. And we'll be getting into astrotheology as the main underlying exoteric aspect of what religion is all about. Once you strip away that exoteric cover story, you find something deeper beneath it that relates with the self and relates with consciousness. And we'll be talking about those esoteric components. And when we begin to get into this distinction between exoteric, or the outward explanation or cover story, if you want to look at it that way, versus the esoteric, the meaning that is reserved for the initiated. That is what occultists basically keep for themselves, and they give the exoteric cover story to others who do not know themselves and do not understand their symbolism or their system of manipulation. So we'll be looking at the distinction between those two principles, exoteric philosophy or ideology and esoteric philosophies. And this will lead into a deeper exploration of the occult and its movements, its schools of thought. When we are looking at time, we have to understand first and foremost our conception of what time is, and how we base our measurement of time is always based, in the modern world at least, upon physical, cyclical movements of objects. The earth rotates once per day upon its axis. That's a physical movement. We measure the month based upon essentially the moon and its movements. That's why it's called a month, based upon the moon, another physical astronomical body. We base our year upon the revolution of the earth around the sun. Again, another physical movement that is cyclical. What is the importance of physical, cyclical movements when it relates to our psychological perception of time? Why is that important? What does that do to the mind? What does that do to the perceptions? What does that do to the psychology of a person? Well, one of the first things that it does is it begins to paint the picture within the mind of their perception of the world upon this physical and cyclical movement, that things have always been this way, things are this way now, and things always will be this way. It is a sense of eternity or forever or unchangingness. Moreover, it starts to put the idea in people's mind and get them to think that change is not possible at all, that there is just continual cycles that go on and on and on and on and on forever, in one direction, no less, starting in the past, proceeding through the present, and moving to the future. Linear time, linear thinking, time-bound thinking. And that's ultimately where a trap gets created in consciousness. Time-bound awareness is an extremely low form of consciousness. Material-based awareness is connected with time-bound awareness. Why? Because we're basing our view of our movement through time upon physical movements that are endlessly repeating. Therefore, we begin to think in endlessly looping, repeating ways. Cyclical, just going around in circles. The earth is going around in a circle. It is going in a larger circle. The moon is going around in a circle around the earth. The Earth is then going in a larger circle around the Sun. The Sun is going in a larger circle around the center of the galaxy. Circular movements, meaning you're never actually going anywhere. This form of linear, cyclical time traps people in a modality of, it's always going to be like this. It's never going to change. It's going to keep doing the same thing forever and ever and ever and ever. You'd be surprised how many people, whether they think about this consciously or not, from a subconscious level, just the fact that our system of time is based upon physical movements of objects, material things, how their consciousness falls into this pattern of always been this way, is this way now, always going to be this way, and there's nothing I can do about it. When you really begin to break down our perceptions of time, and you understand this is how people think based on time, based on our system of timekeeping, you understand how powerful of a hold the entire conception of time has over the human psyche. Now, what's the alternative to this? Well, before we even explain or explore that, let's look at some of the expressions that we use. We say time is money. We equate time and wealth. We look at time as a quantity, not a quality. Definitely look at it as a quantity, much more so than we ever look at time as qualitatively based. We look at it as quantitatively based. I don't have the time. There's not enough time. I need more time. Scarcity-based thinking. The more our lives become hectic and we still try to stay in these linear modalities of thought and consciousness, the more it seems like there is less and less time in which to do the things that we want to do or need to do. This paints a perception of time speeding up as there never being enough time, as there seemingly not being the same amount of hours in the day that there used to be. And we could look at the words, as we just saw. Month is related to moon, the moon. Hours. Why are they called hours? They're related to Horus, the sun god. The golden falcon in Egyptian cosmology that treks across the sky each day as the solar disk, the sun. An allegory, to be sure, a metaphor. However, the word hour named after him, the sun coming up on the zone of Horus, the horizon, the horizon, named after Horus. And we'll be looking at this when we look into religion, because you have to understand how Horus is connected with Christianity. When we look into astrotheology, we'll be taking an in-depth look at that. Different physical objects, in this case, planetary bodies, the sun. We were talking about Horus, the sun god of Egypt, named after the hour. Let's look at how some physical nesting of cycles is used when it comes to our way that we divide time, different measurements of time. We could see that these are nested within each other and the same pattern repeats. Again, this is psychologically getting into the subconscious of a person. This is basically painting the picture that the entire universe is, like Russian dolls, like a prison that you can never get out of. You get out of one, you hit another wall, you go into another doll, and then get out of that one, and it keeps going and going and going. It's a linear, cyclical, endless progression. And that paints a picture of hopelessness in most people's minds, the inability to change. It basically gives them a sense of futility. That's what it paints in the psyche, in most people. People who can't see through this linear way of perceiving what we call time. So look at the smallest gradation of time that we basically work with. Of course, we have smaller gradations used in science, but I'm talking about for the general person, the second is the smallest gradation. Now, the second is actually dedicated to the planet Mercury. Now, that sounds strange to most people, but if you follow this progression, you'll understand how this works. And I'll put some images related to this on my podcast section. Again, every week I put related images, documents, movies, anything connected to the topic that I'm talking about up on my website in the podcast section. So you could go to the show for that week, you can listen to it or download it, and then you can view associated images, documents, videos, etc. on the podcast page. Mercury is considered the second object in our solar system, the sun being the primary object, the first object. So Mercury is the first planet from the sun in our solar system. It also has the fastest orbit. Its orbit, I believe, is approximately 80 days, or just shy of that, about 79 days in Earth days. So it makes one complete revolution around the sun every 79 days or so. This makes it the fastest planet. And in Greek tradition, Mercury was considered the messenger of the god. In Roman tradition. So the Greeks called him Hermes. Okay, he was considered a messenger of the gods. In Egyptian tradition, he was known as Thoth. This is because he is the closest to the sun, which is considered the bringer of life and light and energy, essentially being the embodiment of God in the solar system. So the second hand, okay, that's positioned around the central hub, all of the hands on a clock position from the center. If we look at an analog clock, this will be demonstrated much easier than if we simply try to think about it. If you hold the image of an analog clock in your mind, okay, the center point represents the sun. A circle with a dot in the center is the ancient symbol of the sun. And as we look at some of these concepts that get a bit more esoteric, symbolism is going to be very critical to keep in mind. And we're going to have to understand and become symbol literate, understand the language of symbolism as it has been used throughout the ancient world and as it is still used in the modern world. So a dot with a circle around it. This is the symbol of the sun. It's an archetypal symbol. An archetype, as we talked about before, is a simple form that it has a meaning inherent to it that is already indwelling in the human psyche and in the subconscious mind. It's ancestral memory. This is embedded in our subconscious. We may not be aware of it at a conscious level of the meaning of the symbol, but we know it at an intuitive, fundamental level of consciousness. That's an archetype. One of the biggest archetypes is the egg. We've talked about that briefly before on the show. Another archetype is the solar symbol of a dot with a circle around it. So, going back to breaking down this nested cycle of time in our method of timekeeping, the second hand, the smallest gradation that we use at a practical level on a daily basis, is given to the planets. Okay? This is of the three ancient cults of astrotheology. Astrotheology, astro meaning star, theos meaning God. Okay? Astrotheology, logos meaning word.
What's
Yes,
the
Bob.
difference between that and astrology?
Astrology is a study of these movements and basing predictions upon some of the movements and positioning of these bodies.
Okay, I see.
Astrotheology is the basis of a belief system rooted in the story about these gods in the sky. Okay? People have called the three great religions of the world, the three most popular religions of the world, essentially, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, the desert sky god religions. These are the three religions that developed out of the ancient world based upon the three cults that developed in the ancient world. You had the solar cult, the lunar cult, and the cult of the planets and stars, or the lesser lights. So you have two great lights of the heavens, the sun and the moon, and then you have the smaller, the pinpoints of light, okay, the stars and planets, each one given to a different religion. And as we will see, each one given to a different gradation of timekeeping. And then that cycle is repeated. It is nested. Okay, it's a nested time cycle. Again, nesting is very important in the occult as well. Again, think of the object, the symbol of Russian dolls. One thing embedded in another, in another, endlessly. Okay?
What about fractals? They come to mind.
Same concept, fractals. Now, yes, this is true of the universe in a wider sense, but I'm talking about how something that is true is manipulated to have a specific condition, to generate a specific condition in the human psyche. That's the key point there. So if we look at these gradations of time, we'll see a specific pattern nested in them. The second hand, given to Mercury, goes around the sun, or the central hub of an analog clock, faster than any of the other hands. Okay? So Mercury, the second object, that's why it's called the second hand. It goes around the hub, the dot in the middle of the clock, representing the sun. Okay? The second hand on a clock, meaning not the next hand, not the second hand itself. The next hand that we come to is the minute hand. Okay? Minute is derived from one of the words of the moon in the ancient world. In the Phoenician tradition, the moon was known as Min. The goddess of the moon, Min, M-I-N, was one of her names. The moon always being a feminine aspect, a feminine presence. It is considered a female presence, okay? Just as the sun is considered a male presence, lunar associated with the yin or feminine energy, and the solar energy associated with the yang or masculine energy. So it's very close to moon. The moonit, the minute, the min hand. Min, a name for the moon. So the minute is the next gradation of time upwards. Okay? Above that, we have the hour hand. Now, this is named after Horus, or the sun god. And this is, of course, given to the sun. So we see the planets actually embedded in our system of time. The planets, the moon, and the sun. Planets, Mercury, second hand. The minute hand, the moon, named after Min, goddess of the moon. Then the hour, named after Horus, the sun god. Now, this cycle repeats. What is the next measure of time above one day? Okay, of course, a day is given to the earth. Okay? Each day is one spin of the earth upon its axis. So we face the sun, then we turn away from the sun, and then it goes back, and that's one day. It's a revolution of the earth on its axis, a rotation of the earth on its own axis of rotation. That's one day. Now, let's look at, so the earth is one of the planets, okay? But as we see, we have a 7-day system in the modern world, a week. If we look at the names of each one of the days that is in a week, we see that each one is given to a planet. So now we're back to planet. A day is reserved for the planet, and so is the week. So the day is the Earth's. That's the planet we are upon. And then the wider aspect of the days of the week is the week. Each one is given to one of the other planets.
Now, let me guess what Monday is all about, Mark, if I may. Moon Day, perhaps?
Of course. Monday is the moon. Okay? Tuesday. Now, immediately, one may not be immediately recognizable, so it will help to go into other languages. And I have seen you can take it into a few other languages, but the easiest language to understand all of these is the French language in conjunction with English. So if we look at the day that is named after the name Tuesday, in French, Tuesday is Mardi, M-A-R-D-I, as in Mardi Gras, Fat Tuesday, Mardi. Okay? So this is the root of Mars, M-A-R-S, Mars. Okay? Tus is also a name of an ancient god that was named after Mars, the god of war. 9/11, 2001, incidentally, occurred on a Tuesday because they were invoking war. They were invoking the entire spirit of war with that false flag operation.
Oh, yeah.
So Tuesday is given to Mars. Wednesday, okay, again, maybe not immediately recognizable in the English language, but if we look at the French language, Wednesday is mercredi. Mercredi in French. That's Mercury. So Wednesday is named after Mercury. Thursday, okay, in French is jeudi, J-E-U-D-I, but it is Thor's day, the Norse god. Thor, associated with Jupiter, the same basic god, Jupiter, named by the Romans. So Thor's day or Thursday is named for Jupiter. Friday. Now, Freya was one of the goddesses' names in the Norse tradition. Freya. Okay? So this is a feminine day. There are only two feminine days of the week. Monday, named after the moon, and Friday, named after the other feminine planet in the solar system. If we take the name Friday into the French language, this is Vendredi, V-E-N-D-R-E-D-I, Vendredi, named after Venus, the other feminine planetary body in the solar system.
Can I try to get the last two?
Sure, go.
And then it's only appropriate, I think. Well, I'll get to that when we get there. But Saturday seems to me like it has to do with Saturn.
Sure. I mean, it's right in the word. That one's real easy.
Right.
And of course,
Sunday as well. Sunday, and
right.
That's the most, I guess, crucial of them all because of all these sun cults, as you mentioned. And it's kind of interesting to me, Mark, how you start off on a moon day and you end on a Sunday, and there's got to be something behind that.
And well, some people will say that you start off on a Sunday and end on a Saturday, and there's something behind that as well. See, the Sabbaths of each of the desert sky god religions, or the astrotheologically based religions, each one is given to either the sun, the moon, or the planets and stars. Okay? So the moon is actually given to the Islamic religion. This is the lunar-based cult of the ancient world. It worships on Friday as its Sabbath. And you would say, okay, well, that's Venus. But Venus is also connected with the feminine aspect of the moon. Okay? Venus is another name for the goddess. The goddess, Venus, Isis, Hathor, Aphrodite. You could go on and name the different names of the goddess, Semiramis. These are all connected with the moon in some form or another. So the feminine presence is always a lunar presence. And this is a lunar-based religion. It's not only lunar-based, but it's galactic-based. This is the religion that ultimately worships the galaxy. Okay, we'll be talking about this and going in further to this when I get into astrotheology in a much more fundamental way when we talk about religion, coming up on future shows. But that's the Islamic religion is actually derived from the lunar cult. The Christian religion, that's quite easy to figure out if we understand the basics of the symbolism of the sun and the Son of God. Okay, you could look at movies, documentaries like Zeitgeist Addendum, or look into the works of Jordan Maxwell, and you could easily trace the astrotheological basis of Christianity to the solar cult, the Son of God. Okay, so the worship is on Sunday. That's their Sabbath. Okay, the Savior who dies and then rises. Okay, rises again to bring life to the world. The sun dies each night and then rises each day to bring new life to the world. Okay, Saturday is the Sabbath of Judaism. So this is from the ancient world, the cult of the planets and the stars. Okay, and its symbol is a star. The Islamic religion, its symbol is the moon. The symbol of the religion, the moon, with a small star next to it. That's the crescent moon. The symbol of the Judaic religion, a star. And the symbol of the Christian religion, a cross, which is a zodiacal cross. The zodiacal cross, the zodiac. That's what it is actually representative of, the sun upon the great cross of the zodiac. So we look at the zodiac. Okay, the sun symbolically placed in the middle, 12 houses or divisions around it. The 12 helpers of the sun, the 12 disciples of Jesus. Okay? Let's look at the next cycle up. So, of course, we have had the week, and that was based upon the planets. Now, the next cycle of time up, the month, and we have already alluded to that. That's based upon the moon, the month, and that is how we measure basically a month, the lunations of the moon. So again, we see this nested cycle. We had the second given to the planets, specifically Mercury. Then we went up to the minute given to the moon. Then we went up to the hour given to the sun, the day and week given to the planets again. Then we go back up a month, a longer duration of time given to the moon again. And then the next gradation of time, the year, of course, measured by our revolution around the sun. So that's given to the solar concept and the solar cult as well. Now, when we start to understand this physically, materially, that's the key thing, the materialistically based measurement of time. It's always based upon matter. That's the key thing to keep in mind. It's based on matter and materialistic thought. When we say time is money, we're equating it with something that is materialistic. The fake money, not the real money, the one eye, but the fake proxy for balance and imagination and harmony with nature and understanding natural law and enlightenment, etc. That's what our fiat currency, debt-based monetary system, fractional reserve, central bank owned and controlled monetary system is all about. Okay? So when we associate endlessly repeating physical, materialistic movements of objects with time, our consciousness tends to become more materialistic. This works whether we understand it, we don't understand it, we know it consciously, we're ignorant of it, it doesn't make a difference. We are being entrained to something. So this is another word I want to bring up when we're talking about time. Entrainment. E-N-T-R-A-I-N, entrainment. Okay? This means to get the mind following along, to set up a system of leaders and followers. Entrainment, a train, entrainment. M-E-N-T, the basis of mind, mente in Latin. Entrainment essentially means to make the mind follow. And right there in the word that we use in relation to time, okay, we have a concept that is related to mind control, getting the mind to follow along. So we will explore deeper aspects of the astrotheological basis of the world religions coming up in future shows. We'll go into that in the future. But we saw how this is intricately connected with our gradations and measurements of time in the world today. So we can go up another step from the year. Well, you say, okay, well, how is anything measured even bigger than a year? Well, there's the astronomical and astrological clock. Okay, this is known as the Great Year, or what astronomers refer to as the precession of the equinoxes. Now, this is a little bit of a abstract concept to understand, but if you do explore a little bit about astronomy, and astronomy is a fascinating topic to look into, it's a fascinating science. I do encourage people to look into the movements of the planets and the sun and the earth, etc., and the moon. Understanding this is actually really, if we break past the exoteric, okay, and we break out of the linear time-based thinking, this becomes a very powerful metaphor for different aspects of the self. And that's ultimately what astrology becomes all about. Now, I wouldn't call myself by any stretch of the imagination an expert in astrology, even in some of the symbols of astrology, okay? It is the occult science that I feel that I need the most study in compared to the knowledge that I have about other occult sciences. So it is probably my weakest area of my delving into the occult in general is astrology. I have looked into it a bit, but my interest in it is in relation to religion when it comes to astrology, because that's all religion basically is about. It's about the movements of the planets and the attributions of the planets, and that is what is ascribed to the gods of these religions. We understand the God that is ultimately being worshipped in Islam is really about the galaxy, okay? It's about the feminine aspect of creation, which gives rise to the stars of the galaxy. See, in Islam, there is a black cube called the Kaaba at Mecca, and the adherents of Islam make a pilgrimage and wear a white cloak only, and then they go around the Kaaba in a counterclockwise direction. Well, this is representative of the stars going around the central black hole of the Milky Way galaxy in a counterclockwise rotation. This is an astrotheological ritual because ultimately it is the moon and galactic cult. The Christians worship the sun upon the cross of the zodiac, crucified upon the great cross of the zodiac, which has to do with the precession of the equinoxes, which has to do with the cycle of the year, the solstices and equinoxes forming a cross on the zodiac. The 12 helpers, again, representative of each house of the 12 houses of the zodiac. So the Judaic religion, again, based in the gods, the Elohim, plural gods. Why plural? Well, you have the singular gods of the solar and lunar cult and the plural gods of the Judaic cult. The stars and the planets, all the small lights of the heavens. It all starts to fall into line and make perfect sense once you understand the astrotheological basis for religion. And moreover, it perfectly helps us to understand how time is chopped up in little pieces and given to different gods of the ancient world, and what that does to the human psyche. I see we have a caller on the line. Let me quickly, before I take this call, give the call-in numbers for the show. You can call in on 2 different networks, broadcasting on TalkShoe and Blog Talk Radio on the Intel Hub News Network. So, the call-in number for TalkShoe, 877, I'm sorry, scratch that. The call-in number for TalkShoe, 724-444-7444. Once again, the call-in number 724-444-7444. The call ID number 83515. Once again, the call ID for the show, which you'll be prompted for, 83515. The call number for Blog Talk is 646-727-3387. Once again, 646-727-3387. I see we have a caller here on TalkShoe. I'm going to attempt to take this call. Let's see what happens. Freedom in Texas Now. You are on live on What on Earth is Happening. Are you there? Caller from Texas, are you there?
Oh, yeah, Mark, thank you so much for having me on the program today. Calling from...
I recognize that this is Bob, isn't it?
I figured I'd jump in there and make things interesting. I guess your caller's not there.
Hey, you have anything for us, though?
BobChelsky@Daylight.com. I've been enjoying the show, and it's so funny how every time we come up to a commercial break, you happen to be talking about time. Throughout the program, that's kind of the theme. And I was wondering if I didn't have any knowledge of the 7-day week or the Monday-Friday system or the hour-minute system, how would I live my life? You know, how different would it be? And how controlled are we to time? And how is time associated with our price system, our monetary system? Because, like you keep saying, time is money. So in a sense, they have created a control of our lives using this tool of time. And I think this is an underestimated tool of corruption.
It's one that you don't hear many people talking about because it's abstract. It's largely based in symbolic thinking, because ultimately the answer is there is no such thing as time, just like there is no such thing as money. It doesn't exist. It's a construct that only we make up, and it only exists in the human mind and psyche. And we need to break that linear pattern of endlessly repeating cycles that go on and on and on and on and on that we never break free of. We need to break the psychological hold that time has over us. And like you said, how would that make our lives look in the aftermath if we began thinking in nonlinear time-based terms? Not non-time-bound awareness means you're always in the present moment. There is only one moment, and it is now. The past is gone.
Well,
that learning of patience comes with its own rewards.
Well, it's been said that the only reason for the existence of the perception of linear time is to separate different events so that everything isn't perceived as all happening at once. And that may sound like a cliche. That may sound like a cliche, you know, but that's part of, I guess, why we perceive time as such. But, you know, there's another cliche that the time is now, and that one is really true. There is no other moment. There's nothing. The past is gone. It's over. There's nothing you're going to be able to do to change that. The future has not arrived yet. We exist in the now, and if we really bring our focal point of observation, our observer qualities into the present moment, it's a powerful shift in awareness that takes place. While I think that he doesn't talk about things in a big, wider sense of what's going on in the world, when it comes to the concept of time, I think that Eckhart Tolle has it very correct about his concept of true present moment awareness and how we need to bring ourselves into the now and stay there. Understand that time-bound awareness is what sets us up for all other forms of manipulation. The book Be Here Now by Ram Dass also discussed this, and I think that's another powerful book for people who are explorers in consciousness. And like Bob was talking about earlier, psychedelics, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago and last week a little bit, these can really give you the sense of non-time-bound awareness, of complete oneness with the now. And, it can be a disconcerting thing because it really is a significantly altered state of consciousness. But there are certain psychedelics, entheogens, that will completely obliterate your sense of the time-bound awareness in the traditional sense that we normally experience it, that we normally perceive it in our normal waking consciousness. And it will help us to expand our consciousness out beyond that box of linear time. It's something that we need to work on breaking as a species. But that happens, by doing it on a one-to-one basis. And in that regard, I think some psychedelics can be a powerful tool.
Yeah, I can imagine that being so, considering there have been many guys that have spoken about how specifically, most recently it was Joe Rogan. Previous to that, it was Terence McKenna, as well as Bill Hicks. All three of them have spoken in the past about what they called the stoned ape theory, and it's pretty much about how ancient man or caveman or previous, even past Neanderthal, was just sticking their nose into the ground and bumping into various things that would, when they started to eat them in natural foraging and such, they wound up having these experiences, and those experiences wound up causing various shifts in how the brain functioned, as well as sometimes sexual excitement, and that then also started to produce more people of that nature.
Right. I think a good book on that, and this is a guy who has really explored the nature of time with his time wave zero theory, having to do with habit and novelty. Terence McKenna, who I mentioned a couple of weeks ago and last week, him and his brother Dennis wrote a book called The Invisible Landscape, which was about their concept of time. I hear the music. We're coming. He brought up a couple of people's names. We briefly talked about psychedelics as a method of breaking down this psychological barrier of time and our perception of it, and helping us to live in the now and realize that the now is all that there is. Terence McKenna was instrumental, one of the first people who was instrumental in helping me to understand that topic. His books are all phenomenal. He's got a few really great books out. He wrote one, I believe it was his first book. He wrote it with his brother. It was called his brother Dennis McKenna, who is actually still involved in the ethnobotany and psychedelic community today. They wrote a book called The Invisible Landscape, in which they break down this theory of habit, which is, doing the same thing over and over again, often, expecting a different result but getting the same one, of course. And novelty, which is newness, change, etc. Basically, evolving. That's what his theory of novelty is ultimately about. That's what ultimately all theories of non-time-bound awareness and non-materialistic time measurement is ultimately about. Terence McKenna, of course, coming up with this concept called time wave zero, which he equated with the Mayan calendar. His end date for his time wave zero theory was corresponded with the end date of the Mayan calendar, which is December 21st, 2012, a date we hear a lot about in the in the alternative community, the consciousness movement, the New Age movement, etc. I think there is something to the Mayan calendar. I think that the Maya were obsessed over time because they were much more in tune with the zero time, or the now, the present moment. I think that some of their shamans, some of their teachers had a deeper understanding of time than we do today. They understood time as not a perpetual cyclical measurement of physical objects and their motions. They understood it as a progression in consciousness. They understood time as the thing that we move through in consciousness on our journey of evolution in consciousness. They understood that time was moving toward something that was ineffable, intangible, non-physical, and that it represented a paradigm shift, if you will. It represented what some of the other traditions about time refer to as a shift of the ages, a change in the way human beings think and interact, what has been called in the new consciousness movement the paradigm shift. I heard this referred to for the first time myself back probably in the very early 90s, late 80s or early 90s, the paradigm shift. And I think this is something that we're in the middle of now, and it's still in its transitional phases, and it's all about moving to a higher level of awareness and consciousness when it comes to what is taking place on this planet and when it comes to what is taking place within each one of us. So Terence McKenna, his other books, The Food of the Gods, about psychedelics and their role that they played in human history and the expansion of human consciousness. Also, his other book called True Hallucinations, about his journeys with his brother and friends in the Amazon basin and their use of psychedelics there. He has another one, which is, I think, one of my favorites, called The Archaic Revival. And this is a collection of essays by Terence, and it's just brilliant with what it lays out about consciousness and time. So Terence McKenna, I can't recommend people look into him enough. As I said a few weeks, over the last couple weeks, tons of information from Terence. I'll have to post a couple of things on the website, particularly regarding his theories about time, habit, and novelty. Another gentleman that Kevin brought up was Bill Hicks, the comedian. And we talked a little bit about psychedelics. Bill Hicks was a very conscious individual. He put a lot of this information in very comedic terms for people to understand it and not, be hostile about it. As the saying goes, if you're going to tell people the truth, interject some comedy or else they'll kill you. So he had a saying about LSD, and again, this is another psychedelic. It's demonized. It can be used in a very negative context, and there's also positive usages for it. Again, it's a tool, and it's something that we could explore if we go into it with the right set and setting or the right mindset. And Bill Hicks always had a little line that he did in his comedy routines when he said, today, a young man on acid realized that all matter is merely energy condensed to a slow vibration, that we are all one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. There is no such thing as death. Life is only a dream, and we are the imagination of ourselves. And then he would say, and now here's Tom with the weather. He's like, this is a news story it's presented as. He says, wouldn't you like to see a positive LSD story on the news? It's it helps us to understand what the power of some of these psychedelics, what the power that is embedded in these substances, in these forms of consciousness, as I talk about them as. Yet people continue to demonize them because they think that it isn't our birthright to experiment with our own consciousness, and that our own consciousness does not belong to us. My consciousness is mine. It is my own. It may be part of a larger ocean of consciousness, but in this vehicle, I own my body. I'm the steward of it, at least, until I relinquish it. And I also own my mind. I own my consciousness. And that means that I own my ability to take what I want into my body, whether it be extremely good for me, such as healthy organic food, or whether it be extremely negative or bad for me, such as any sort of compound or drug. And this requires study and thought, and understanding what we're actually taking upon ourselves when we take in anything. And that could be from something as simple as sugar or flour, or smoking a cigarette, to smoking a marijuana joint, or smoking DMT, or snorting cocaine, or shooting heroin. It's up to us. It's up to us to exercise our responsibility for those things. But that's going off on a little bit of a tangent, because what I was really emphasizing is that psychedelics, as we talked about over the last couple of weeks, do have the ability to really change our perception of time, for a brief time anyway. And when we come back down to the ground, so to speak, upon using a substance such as LSD or DMT or a psilocybin, it helps us to shift our focus, shift our awareness a little bit about what time is, about our perception of it, and about how we are often, for more of our lives than not, living in time-bound awareness. So I recommend Terence McKenna's books on some topics such as this. I recommend Eckhart Tolle's books. I think that he could go further when it comes to explaining some of the things that are going on in the world. And hey, so could have Terence McKenna. However, the contributions that they do make regarding these topics are invaluable. So please do look into both Terence McKenna and Eckhart Tolle. And Bill Hicks, and his comedy is phenomenal. He's one of the best. So it looks like we have a caller who called back in. Here we go. Caller, you're on What on Earth is Happening. What do you have?
Mark?
Hey.
Mark, it's Chris.
Chris, how are you? How you doing?
I'm not having a lot of trouble with this talk show as usual, so I tried to call in on Blog Talk.
Sure. You're coming in loud and clear.
Mark, okay, I'm glad to hear that. Mark, the other parts of reality, it's just an illusion or a perception.
Yes, and it's a very heady concept of time that is put forward in that movie. Chris, I want to thank you for calling. Unfortunately, we're going to have to end the show a little bit early tonight. There's been some technical problems, and some other things are going on, and Bob has asked me to cut the show short for now. We're going to pick up on this topic next week and continue to talk about this a little bit, because I know some other people. Kevin wanted to chime in with some other things. I have a few other things to say. I wanted to talk about the great year and the precession of the equinoxes as a grand cycle of time, get into the yugas a little bit. So we'll extend this topic over into next week, and we'll also talk about the 11th method of manipulation next week, which is what I call the DHR factor, which is us basically police dogging ourselves. The denial, hassle, and ridicule factor that is so prevalent among the people of our society that don't want to look at the truth about what's going on in our world. So we'll transition into that topic, but we'll continue to talk on this topic for a little bit next week. Chris, I want to thank you for calling in. I'm Mark Passio. You've been listening to What on Earth is Happening? Exploration, as we have already done on mind control, to get through these three techniques, because I'm really, really going to open up and expand on these topics even more extensively than I have done in my presentation. And in doing so, as I told people last week, this will act as a subtle form of initiation into different occult philosophies. And again, people shouldn't be concerned about that or worried and thinking this is something that is bad or negative. Occult, as we have said many times on this show, simply means hidden knowledge, and it is ultimately hidden knowledge about ourselves and our psychological makeup and motivations. If you keep that knowledge hidden from people, if you are so inclined, you can wield that knowledge and information as a weapon against people, and that is, in fact, what is being done. The only solution to this is enough education about this hidden knowledge, bringing it forward into the light of day so that it is no longer hidden. And when people become acutely aware of this information, they can basically no longer be manipulated by it because they have brought it to the conscious level of awareness. And that's what this show is all about, awareness and coming to a higher level of it. So starting 2 weeks from now, we will be exploring deeply the occult, and we will be starting that process or initiating it by looking at what religion really is. Over the next few weeks, we'll be looking at religion as astrotheology. We'll be breaking down different religious traditions in both the exoteric or astrotheological form, and then we will look at the esoteric underlying meanings that are revealed only to initiates of mystery traditions, which are what religions are, I guess you could say, fallen versions of. After that, we will be looking at symbology. And again, this will cross over a lot because symbology plays into religion so much that it will be pretty much impossible to talk about it without looking at some of the symbolic language that is encoded into religion. Finally, we'll be looking at what I call chaos sorcery, which is essentially the Hegelian dialectic enacted upon a mass scale, on a grand stage. This is the biggest ritual that the occult ever trots out into public and actually basically wields a human sacrifice ritual or some other form of mass ritual magic right out in the open for all to see. And this is done to instill fear into the psyche of the human population so that they will give their rights away willingly to the hidden covert manipulators that plan these events all along. So we'll look at that as well, and then we'll transition from the stage of this show that looks at the dark into the part that puts forward the light. And we'll be getting into deep solution-based thinking. This will be many weeks from now, but I'm just giving a general broad outline of what we have in store, as the weeks progress on what on earth is happening. So, tonight I want to briefly recap some of the things that we talked about last week when it comes to time. The illusion of time. Time, as we explored last week, does not actually exist. The only thing that does exist is the present moment. And the solution to the psychological manipulation when it comes to time is to become aware of that there is only the present moment, there is only the now in which we operate. The past is gone. There's no point in dwelling in the past. Bringing attention to the past and educating ourselves as far as history is concerned is absolutely critical and essential in the understanding of what's taking place in our world. What I'm talking about is living in the past. That's what's dangerous. That is a method of mind control that many people get stuck in. They cannot let go of events and circumstances that happened in the past. They cling on to these things and kind of hold them close to their chest as something that defines them as a person. People who are trapped in this past awareness, this past modality of consciousness. They can't get over things that occurred to them. They can't move on in relationships that happened in the past. They can't. They bring those into the present moment, and in doing so, they taint the present moment. They take away the power of the present moment. People do the same thing when projecting their consciousness into the future. That's a powerful tool that human beings have. We can look at trends that have already taken place, and based upon those trends, we can extrapolate what the future may bring. But to get trapped in future awareness, future consciousness, I guess you could say, or lack thereof, as the case may be, can be very dangerous, because then we're living in anxiety over the future rather than actually living in the present moment. So the present moment and present moment awareness is really the solution to this time-bound form of consciousness. And that's what we essentially talked about last week on the show. We also started talking about timekeeping methods and how these are all based in physical modalities of consciousness. They're based on the consciousness being trapped in not only time-bound awareness, but material modes of thinking. And this is done by basing all of the cycles of time that we use, or the units of time that we use, in a physical expression of basing them upon units that are broken down based upon the physical movements of objects in the solar system, essentially heavenly bodies. That's what we essentially use for time keeping. And this roots our consciousness in material-only thinking, materiality. We look at time as based in money. Time is money. That's an expression that is often used. We say we don't have enough time. That's basing time as a quantity rather than a quality. Okay? There is such a thing as time as currency, however, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about tonight. When people say time is money, they're talking about the fake form of money. We talked about this when we talked about money a few weeks back on this show. And essentially, what we want to look at tonight is time as real money, as real currency, the currency of spirit. There is such a thing, and we want to look at how time acts in this capacity. Before we do that, I'll briefly recap some of the cycles that we talked about timekeeping being based on in the modern world. We saw that time is connected to astrotheology, and this is kind of a prelude to talking about religion as astrotheology. This is because the astrotheological cults of the ancient world are basically broken up into three main groupings. These three groupings are the cult of the sun, the cult of the moon, and the cult of the stars and the planets. So you have the cult of the greater lights and the cult of the lesser lights. I hear the break music playing, so we're going to get into this recap in just a moment. Stay tuned and we'll be back. All right, we're back. Before the break, I was talking about the different gradations of time that are given to the different astrotheological cults, or in other words, the different bodies in the heavens. Okay? We looked at this a little bit last week. I'll briefly recap it before we go into the different aspect of time I want to talk about tonight. We saw that the smallest practical unit of time that we basically use is the second. That was given to the planetary cult. And it was basically for the planet Mercury, because on a clock, the second hand goes around the fastest out of any other hand. And this is the smallest unit. Mercury is the closest to the sun. It goes around faster in its orbit around in its revolution around the sun than any other planet. This is the second object in the solar system, Mercury. I put in a visual aid for this up on my website. Every week the show is podcasted, and you can click on the podcast tab and get related images for any given show. So this was show number 34 last week. This week is show 35. You could check out the images that are related with that show up on the site. The next great astrotheological cult of the ancient world is given to one of the gods of the heavens, is the moon cult. So the minute hand, which is the next gradation of time upward, is given to the moon. Min is a Phoenician word that means moon. That's what the moon was called in that culture. So the minute is associated with the moon. Above that, we have the word hour, and that's the next gradation of time as we progress upward in the unit of length. So that's given to the sun cult, and it is named after Horus. As a matter of fact, you can just, by looking at the word hours, you can see that all of the letters of the word hours is in the word Horus, because these are indeed gradations of time that are allotted to the sun, or Horus as he was known in the ancient Egyptian cosmology. When we progress up in units of time, we can see that the day is given to the planets, again, because it is based, one day is a one rotation of the Earth, okay? And each day, as a matter of fact, of the week is given to the planets. So the day and week is actually assigned to the planetary cult once again. So this cycle repeats as we go up in units of time, as we move on to greater units of time. We saw that Monday is the moon's day. Tuesday in French language is Mardi, and that is Mars's day. In the Norse tradition, the god that represented war was also, that is akin to Mars in the Roman tradition. His name was Tu, T-I-W. So this is Tu's day. Wednesday in the French language is Mercredi, and that is Mercury's day. Mercury is associated with the Greek Hermes and the Egyptian Thoth. Okay, this is the creator god. In the Norse tradition, the creator god, one of them was Odin, and this is also assigned to Odin, Wednesday. So we move to Thursday. We saw that in the French that's Jeudi. That is, in the Norse tradition, Thor's day. Okay, that is given to the planet Jupiter, who is associated with the god Thor in the Norse tradition. And Jupiter was his name in the Roman tradition. Friday is Venus's day. It is named after the goddess Venus. In the French, we see it is Vendredi. In the Norse tradition, which is where the name for Friday comes from, this goddess was referred to as Freya or Freya. Okay? Saturday and Sunday are very obvious. The names are right in the words. Saturday, Saturn's day, and Sunday, the sun's day. Okay, so we move on to the next gradation of time past the day and week. We get to the month. Of course, we talked about this as the month because it is given to the moons. It is given to the moon, the period of the month. It is based upon the periodicity of the moon, the lunation, as it is known. So we go then to the year, and of course that is based on the Earth's movement around the sun, and that's one of the largest units of time that we work with on a practical level. Of course, we have the decade, the century, the millennium, and then there's something bigger than that. There is something called the Great Year. I want to touch on this a little bit before we move on to talking about time as a spiritual currency. The Great Year, or the Platonic Year, it was named after Plato, who kind of came up, or not really came up with it. This has been around a lot longer than when Plato lived, but it is named after him because he basically, I guess, brought it out to the public and popularized it and wrote about it. So it's called the Platonic Year, or the Great Year, simply. This is known scientifically as the precession of the equinoxes, and I'll post probably a slide or two about this in the podcast for this show. the precession is due to the Earth's tilt upon its axis with relation to its orbit around the sun. Okay? It is tilted at a 23.5 degree axis with respect to its orbital path around the sun. Now, that's not what causes the precession. Okay? You have to understand that in order to understand the precession. And what causes it is entirely different, maybe an entirely different thing altogether, which I don't know if we'll get into tonight, because it's debated what causes the precession of the equinoxes. I want to help people to understand from an astronomical point of view simply what this is basically referring to. Over a very great amount of time, the pole of the Earth begins to point toward a different location in the heavens, and it slowly makes a wobble. Okay, now, I am not claiming that the Earth's axis is actually tracing a circle. I'm simply saying that there is a frame of reference at work that visually makes us see that the axis of the Earth slowly drifts, okay, in a counterclockwise circle, and the pole star slowly changes. Okay, what stars the northern pole of the Earth points at slowly changes through this vast amount of time. And the amount of time is approximately 25,000 years that it takes the Earth's axis, and let's just basically say the northern axis of rotation that we observe, that the Earth is basically making this rotational spin around, okay? For it to make one complete circle to go back to the same star or general vicinity of stars that it began at takes approximately 25,000 years. Different people give different numbers for that, but as a general average, approximately 25,000 years for this great cycle, this one great precession of the equinoxes or great year to take place. The reason it is called a precession of the equinoxes is because the constellation that the equinox sun, the spring equinox sun, rises in slowly changes about one time. It changes constellations approximately every 2,100 years, a little bit over 2,100 years, okay? And that is what this measurement generally is referring to. It refers to every 2,100 years or so, the spring equinox moves backwards through the zodiacal houses. So it is not a procession through them, it is a precession. It moves counterclockwise through the zodiacal houses as the Earth's rotation moves counterclockwise around the pole star, okay? So the reference frame does not necessarily need to be the actual wobble of the Earth, the planet Earth itself. I do not particularly...
Oh, welcome back to What on Earth is Happening with Mark Passio. Mark, it looks like TalkShoe doesn't want to take the same information we logged into it before we dropped. I don't know how much we dropped off of Blog Talk Radio, but we're back from our break on our Blog Talk feed. If you have any thing I can do to hook us up back to your other feed, let me know off the air here and type it to me. If not, we'll just hopefully continue with our feed with Blog Talk Radio.
No problem. Bob, it looks like the call was ended on TalkShoe since the call dropped out there on Skype. I could try to make a new call in TalkShoe and start that up while I'm talking. So I'll try to do that. And we could pick it up during the next break or whatever. So I apologize for the continued tech problems, but let's take a look at where we had left off. So I was talking about the precession of the equinoxes and how this is related to what's known as the Great Year in it's called the Great Year or the Platonic Year in astronomy, and this is what the ages are based upon. The term called ages represents the time period when the sun on the equinox, the spring equinox, rises in a particular constellation of the zodiac. So there are 12 zodiacal constellations. They are Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. The ages, as they are related to the precession of the equinoxes, are actually form, these constellations form a great timekeeping system, which we refer to as the Great Year or the Platonic Year. And that cycle of the sun as it rises in the equinox, in the spring equinox, in each of these houses, for it to precess through all 12 zodiacal houses, and it does this, again, counterclockwise or backwards, in the order I just mentioned them, backwards from the order that I just mentioned them. This cycle, or Great Year, takes approximately 25,000 years. So, if the sun is rising in, let's say, the house of Virgo, what this means, is that if you look at the rising of the sun on the horizon at dawn, behind the sun, visually, the constellation that is there is said to be the house that the sun is currently ruling in during that age. So right now the sun is ruling in the house of Pisces for approximately 2,100 years. If you go out and look at where the sun rises on the equinox, it would be coming up in the house of Pisces. So slowly over a 2,100-year period, the visual, the zodiacal house that visually appears behind the rising sun at the spring equinox changes very slowly over time, and it precesses backwards through the zodiacal houses in a counterclockwise fashion. So, as I said, right now the sun is in Pisces. Within another couple hundred years, if we looked at the rising of the sun on the spring equinox, we would see it coming up in the house of Aquarius. In another 2,100 years after that, we would see it rising in the house of Capricorn on the equinox. So the equinox is not fixed. It continues to precess over large periods of time, approximately 2,100-year cycles for each zodiacal house. You put that all together, times 12, you get approximately a 25,000-year cycle. That is known as the precession of the equinoxes. This becomes important when we start to look at different timekeeping traditions that base some of their ages in these large units of time or great years. The Maya is one of them. Much is made of the Mayan calendar, especially in the world today when we have these prophecies and predictions that are made for the year 2012, that period of time around 2012, which is said to be a transformative time that we are moving toward. Some would say that we are already in. And if you look at the way the Maya kept their system of time, they have these what are called the cycles of the long count. So these are Baktuns, and they form approximately a 5,000-year cycle, and then they repeat. So it's a 5,125-year cycle. they considered that there were 5 of them in one of their great years, or great periods of time that represented a complete transformation of some kind in their system of timekeeping, because again, their time was not really based on physical movements of objects, but as I started to allude to last week, is essentially about the movement of consciousness, the evolution of consciousness through what we refer to as time. And that's essentially what some of their sacred calendars are timing, not simply physical movements of planetary bodies, but they are actually referring to how consciousness itself is changing over time. And if we look at their great year, their long count, in other words, it's a 5,125-year cycle, and they consider that this moves through ages of the elements: a fire cycle, an air cycle, a water cycle, an earth cycle, and of course, an ether or spiritual cycle. You put these 5 together, and again, you have one great procession of the equinoxes, or one great year or Platonic year. This kind of completes the analysis of timekeeping methods related and given to different planetary bodies or astronomical bodies. And again, we see how they progress upward as the length of the timekeeping unit gets larger, from the planetary houses, to the moon, to the sun, and then that cycle repeats once again. Planets, moon, sun. Okay? Aside from that explanation of the procession, and you can look at that, I'll probably post a movie that's related to that, because that will make it a little bit clearer to help understand that. There's a really great documentary called The Great Year that kind of explores this movement, and it also looks at what this what the actual cause for this may be beyond a wobble of the Earth on its own axis of rotation. I tend to not concur with that theory, and I do think there is another reference frame of motion at work. And this movie, The Great Year, kind of explores that a little bit, and I may, if I can find a copy of it floating out there on the net, post that to my podcast section for this week. So, it looks like we are probably only going to be able to take calls on Blog Talk. For those who are listening on that network, the call-in number is 646-727-3387. Sorry, I can't get the talk show up and running right now. But if you want to call into the show, call in on Blog Talk. And that number is, once again, 646-727-3387. I want to shift gears a little bit now on time and talk about time as a currency, a spiritual currency. Again, we talk about, I don't have the time, time is money, but let's talk about how we spend our time, okay? We talked about the fake form of money when we talked about money on the show as also being an illusion, being named after the one eye, Mon eye. Money symbolically being presented as something that is representative of balance and nature and love energy, and it is none of those things. This is all sold to us as a proxy for the real form of money, the true spiritual vision, the one eye, okay? And basically what we want to look at tonight is time as a form of true money, not fake money, not associated with the fake money, but again, this is an abstract idea. Time as something that we pay or spend. Okay, I've said before that there are 2 basic forms of spiritual currency, one being time and the other being attention. And we say the expressions that we use are that we spend our time doing what we're doing, and we pay attention to different things. And depending on how we use that currency, we will receive different results for the spending or paying of it. So if we pay attention to certain things, we will get certain things as a result. If we spend our time doing certain things, we will get certain things in our lives as a result. They will become manifested. So how we focus our attention will get us one thing, and how we spend our time will get us a specific manifestation in our experience of reality. This makes time one of the most important aspects of our lives. What do we spend our time doing? Do we spend it on frivolous pursuits? Do we spend it on totally self-absorbed activities, self-absorption? Do we spend it trying to run away from ourselves? Do we spend it pursuing pure fake monetary to get a very different result in our life? We spend it doing certain things will manifest. We spend it trying to just focus on materialism, not really educating ourselves as regards to our psyche, as regards to the aspects of consciousness and self. We will get certain things in our lives that will basically be pretty uncomfortable. If we do spend it edifying ourselves, educating ourselves about what's really important in life, we do spending it understanding true moral values, we do spend it in pursuit of truth, then very different things will manifest in our lives, and we would see that our lives would flow more effortlessly, and suffering would dissipate, particularly self-imposed suffering, which is what we're drowning in right now in our world. And it's because of the way people spend their time. That's one of the biggest things that really is going on regarding why we're getting what we're getting. Look at what people watch and pay attention to and listen to, and types of conversations that they have with each other that are often completely vapid, that aren't about anything of any true importance or significance. And people can say, oh, well, who are you to determine that? I'm not anybody to determine that, but there are certain things that are true and real and actually going on that we need to be paying attention to around us. And we need to shift our attention to understand, to come to a level of discernment about what is important and what we should be spending our time pursuing or doing in the world. We don't do that, as I said, we're going to continue to suffer, and we're going to be getting results that we really do not want in our lives. So that's pretty much what I have to say on the whole aspect of time. If anybody wants to chime in on that, I'm still taking calls on Blog Talk. The number is 646-727-3387. 646-727-3387. What I want to do now is start to talk about the 11th methodology of mind control. And I'll try to ride out the remainder of the show on this topic and take some calls with it if people feel inclined to call in. So the 11th method of mind control, as I put forward in my presentation and will do so on this radio show, is something that I've grouped three methods that we have of self-policing. That human beings basically ignore reality and police each other. Okay? Ways that we act as sheepdogs to the sheep population. We're basically doing this on our own. as a result of conditioning and programming. We don't even need people to, pressure us into this or force us into this. These are ways that we are imprisoning ourselves of our own volition, giving up our own free will, and saying, we don't even need a master to be whipping us or beating us or locking us up in cages or trying to kill us. We'll do that for the master. Okay, all the different ways that we just basically enslave ourselves. And we try to keep the truth suppressed. We try to keep each other's spirits suppressed. In other words, it's the idea that, I'm in a cage, I'm in a prison, I'm in a mental prison, and a physical one at that, and definitely a spiritual one, whether that's recognized at a conscious level or not. It's of our own design, it's of our own building. Yes, we can talk about the manipulators that formulate all of these methods of mind control, but again, as I've said, they're running a program too, and essentially they really don't have any power when it comes to this. They may be smart and have the will to enact their manipulation techniques and continue to do so, but ultimately it's we who do this to ourselves by giving up our free will over to them and falling in, to this low level of spiritual awareness such that these methods can have any effect over us. It's us doing it to ourselves. I put a slide in my presentation. If you want to know who the real sorcerer of the world, the top-level sorcerer at the top of the pyramid, the whole pyramid of manipulation as we've talked about, if you want to know who that top-level sorcerer is that controls the whole game, look in a mirror. That's who it is. And most people spend their entire lives running away from that fact, refusing to acknowledge it. Don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean simply by changing yourself you're going to be physically free in this world. The problem is that other people are here with you, and they are giving up their free will and acting as that sorcerer or manipulator. Okay? So the object is to change yourself and then help other people to make that same change that you've made. Once you're on the other side of the fence mentally, the goal is to help other people make that journey, make that climb over that fence or that wall. Okay? So let's look at some of the negative aspects when it comes to what people do to themselves to keep themselves in a prison of the mind. I call this the DHR factor after the three aspects that are identified as being the main self-policing techniques. So this is methodology of manipulation, number 11, the denial, hassle, ridicule factor. So let's start with the first one. And boy, is there a whole lot of this in the world, and it continues to be one of the strongest factors toward the suppression of the truth and the suppression of what is really taking place on this planet, and that is denial, psychological denial. What denial is basically a psychological illness. When an organism that has the ability to think comes under such great stress and attack and suffering that it becomes too mentally, emotionally, psychologically painful for them to acknowledge the condition that they are in, they go into a psychological condition known as denial. Some people refer to this when it gets really, really bad as cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance, meaning that the ability to actually cognize one's surroundings and circumstances becomes in such disarray that the person is basically lying to themselves about the condition that they are in. And this is done as a defense mechanism. Denial in general, and cognitive dissonance in particular, is a defense mechanism of the human psyche. But it's also one that if it is held for too long, if we stay in it for too long, we are ultimately going to cause destruction by refusing to acknowledge the causal factors of the problem to begin with. denial is something that addicts are often referred to as being in. They don't want to admit that they have a problem. They don't want to admit that they're doing something that is self-destructive. Not just self-destructive with a lowercase s, as we've talked about the distinction between the lowercase s self and the capital S self or higher self. They're in denial that is self-destructive with a capital S as well. So what we want to look at is why people enter this state. Why do people go into states of denial about problems that are clearly present to a child, let alone an adult human being that's supposed to have developed emotionally and mentally? The reason that people go into this state is simple: fear. Over time, they have chosen fear as the main modality that they wish their consciousness to dwell in. And they have done that because they feel that it is easier simply for them to deny and ignore reality rather than for them to confront what is actually taking place. The confrontation of a problem implies that you have assumed personal responsibility. You've assumed that responsibility because you have acknowledged that the problem exists, and in the acknowledgement of that problem, you're saying, I recognize this situation is present. Well, if you've recognized that the situation is present and you also have basically made a statement about what you desire. So let's say you've recognized that there is a health problem present. Well, probably everyone in the world has made the statement that they want to be healthy. I mean, who says they want to be sick? Who says they want to be ill? Who says they want to have their body riddled with problems due to an addiction? Who says they want to be enslaved? Everybody, if asked, will consciously say, I want to be healthy, I want to be happy, and I want to be free. Well, there are requirements that go along with those things. And if we are doing the opposite of those things, we are taking steps that are the causal factors for creating the opposite of those conditions. So if we're taking steps that are the cause of disease, are the cause of illness, are the cause of enslavement, the only thing that we really can do to reverse those conditions are to assume personal responsibility by first acknowledging the problem is present, acknowledging the causal factors of those problems, and then taking responsibility into one's hands by saying, I am ultimately responsible, and we, in a wider sense, humanity is ultimately responsible for these problems, and then taking the measures to reverse them. And that means not adding the same polarity that created them. Again, Einstein said no problem can ever be solved by the same level of consciousness that created it. Well, if fear created the problem, fear can never undo it. That means that you can never undo any problem that exists through denial. Denial is based in ignorance, which is based in fear, not wanting to look at the truth. The outward refusal, the willing refusal of the truth. And that will become self-destructive every time. The solution is in consciousness that is expansive, which, again, we have called love. What that does is bring the desire to seek truth, and that's what dissipates denial, or the willing refusal to look at truth. And seeking truth leads to knowledge, and as we saw, a diagnosis means through knowledge. Dia in Greek means through or by way of, and gnosis in Greek, Gnosos, in English it's spelled, okay? Gnosis is a Greek word meaning knowledge. So we make a diagnosis of the problem through knowledge. Knowledge is based in truth, which is based in the polarity of love. So this is how we come out of denial. We have to conquer fear. We have to make a conscious decision based in the will to turn our attention toward the root causal factors of the problem. Once we identify those causal factors, then we can act appropriately. Then we have the information to take appropriate action in the world. If we remain uninformed through our ignorance, and specifically through denial that the problem exists to begin with, staying in that condition never sets you off on the journey for information to seek truth. This is the condition so many people are trapped in that it is unbelievable. At the end of the Fed rally this past week, we were handing out information as we marched back and forth along Market Street in Philadelphia. And I saw a great dichotomy of people. There was a great divide. You would take a flyer and try to hand people information about what the Federal Reserve is as an institution, what it is doing right now, what it is and has been for over about 100 years, what it is doing to our country, how it is destroying your ability to basically live a life that doesn't resemble a feudal servitude, feudalism. Okay? We're basically giving very basic single-page info sheets to people, third of a page, half a page, and just asking them to just take a look. Here's some basic info about the Fed, and you could do more research on your own. That's all it was about. Nonpartisan. This isn't left or right. That's an illusion. This isn't Republican or Democrat. That's an illusion. All this was about is giving basic information to people that would hopefully encourage them to do some research on their own about a corrupt and immoral institution. Well, you saw a great division between people in how they would respond toward either taking or not taking this information. What you saw in people, or at least what I saw in people, I'll speak for myself when it comes to this. Perhaps someone else can, chime in on it who may have been there. When we look at who took the information, they seemed humble in many ways. When you looked in their eyes, there was no look on their face of snideness. They didn't have a snide look. They didn't smirk at you. Okay? They looked at you, and their kind of attitude was, well, why would you be out, doing this, trying to give information to people? There was a curiosity there. That's the main word. They had curiosity. And then they would take the information from you in a humble way. In other words, it seemed like what they were acknowledging is that they didn't know what this was about. They didn't have a preconceived notion of what it was about. They simply saw us coming down the street, said, oh, I don't know what this is about. Somebody's handing me a flyer with some basic information on it. I'll take it, and I'll check it out, and I'll find out what it's about. And if I don't think it's about anything that is good for me to know about, I won't pursue it. And if I do, maybe I'll pursue it. But essentially, what I sensed was a general humbleness from the people who took the information. They didn't think they knew it all. They thought there was something that they could learn. Whether they felt that it was valuable or not remained to be seen, but they at least knew, I don't know what this is all about. And that's the beginning of all knowledge seeking, is the words, I don't know. I've said that many times on this show in the past. The beginning of all knowledge is basically admitting to yourself that you do not have knowledge and that you want to set off in search of it. So that three of the most powerful words you can ever speak is, I don't know. Because that sets you off in a journey for the truth. So this seemed to be a smaller percentage of people. I would say maybe 10 to 20% of the people on the street. Now, for the great majority, it was the other way around. There was a disdain for information, a disdain for learning something new or knowledge. And that is always based in fear. The people who refuse to even take a flyer from your hand to see what it was about seemed very snide. They seemed to ridicule what was taking place without any knowledge about it. They seemed to think they already knew what it was all about. And I will almost guarantee you, hardly any of them knew a thing about the Fed. Okay? So they seemed to think that this was either a completely conservative, right-wing Republican thing, or that it was a completely leftist, socialist, Democrat-leaning endeavor. These are people who are still trapped in the left-right paradigm. And they seem to think they already had it all figured out, and that there was nothing that could be brought to their attention that they didn't already know. Call the number for tonight, 646-727-3387. We were discussing the end of the Fed rally, and I was illustrating the denial factor and how this is based in fear. So we're talking about the denial, hassle, ridicule factor. These are methods that people basically police themselves and keep themselves in the mental prisons that they are conditioned into. Was talking about the people who would not take a flyer from our hands, even to look at the information at all. So they had this general quality, the people that refused to look. They had, again, a snide look on their face as if they already understood what they were seeing, when I can almost guarantee you, if you asked any of them about the Federal Reserve, they couldn't tell you one detail about it. They certainly aren't aware that it's basically the cause of the economic crisis that's taking place now. They couldn't tell you that it's devaluing the worth of their money so that they have to work more to pay for less. And if you asked any of them, if you like to pay more money for the same thing year after year, you basically are doing the same amount of work, but your money's worth less. So you have to spend more of it to get the same things. Every person would say, no, I hate that. I want as much money as I can get. Yet you don't want to understand the causal factor of what's doing that. And again, this is even in the fake system of money. As I said in my speech at this rally, there's no such thing as money. It's all an illusion. They're nowhere near that understanding. Excuse me. Take a drink of water there. So it was as if the people who wouldn't take it were in such denial that there was anything that they could possibly come to know that wasn't already in their repertoire of knowledge. They know everything there is to know that could possibly be of any influence in their life or could possibly affect their life for the positive or the negative, that it isn't necessary for me to take information. The other thing that I sensed is that they feel anybody who is saying that they don't like something or protesting against practices that are taking place, that's some form of invalid. It's invalid. You know, that's some form of invalid behavior. That you're never to do that. The idea that you can never be against something, and this comes through the consciousness. This is expressed in people's consciousness through the New Age movement. is big with this. Okay? The New Age movement, in its negative aspect, again, we've talked about this before on the show as controlled opposition. There are some good things in the philosophies, some of the philosophies of aspects of the New Age movement, but largely it's there to stop people from becoming active. That's what the greatest bulk of New Agers are all about. They think they're going to meditate their way to peace on earth, and I got news for you, it's not going to happen that way. You're not going to read your way to freedom either if you're not going to take action in the world. You're not going to read it doesn't matter how much knowledge you have. That's only the beginning of the process. You have to convert knowledge into true wisdom, which is then taking the proper moral action in the world with the knowledge that you have. And I'll repeat that endlessly on this show. It's all about action, ultimately, because it's all about courage. It's all about conquering your fear. And these people have been conditioned by the media and by religion and by the New Age movement that if you don't like something, you don't ever stand against a practice or an institution. You try to be for something else. Well, I wholesalely reject this. Okay? This is not what the law of attraction is. The people who advocate the law of attraction say that is the law of attraction. Nonsense. Absolute BS. You can be against something and be completely morally in the right and doing the right thing in the world. That does not enter into the law of attraction. Okay? Yeah, you should be talking about let's do this as opposed to this, combine that with it, but not shining the light on the darkness is not going to get you very far. Refusing to shine light on the darkness and the immoral practices that are taking place in our world is denial. It's denial. And so many people are trapped in this state of consciousness. And again, politics, the New Age movement, religion, these are all things that are pushing people toward that state of inactivity, of right-brained imbalance. Too much of the passive modality and not enough active or sacred masculine modality of consciousness, which is right action in the world. I actually said to one young woman that I was passing by on the street when I tried to hand her a flyer, and she just would not even practically look at me. I said, "Are you afraid of information?" Because that's all this is. Take of it and make of it what you will. No one's telling you to believe anything. We're asking you to look into something. And she said, "Yeah, I'm afraid of new information. I already, I don't want anything new brought to my attention." Admitted that, actually said that. And my response simply was, that's why you will be going deeper into enslavement. People who think like that think there's nothing new I can learn, I don't need to look at anything else, and most of all, are in fear of looking at anything else, are causing their own enslavement by that modality of consciousness. That combined with not taking action in the world, and you can't really take action unless you inform yourself properly, or you can, but you're going to basically be, getting completely chaotic results, which is why we have the chaos that we do in our world, because most people are uninformed. But absolutely outrightly admitting, I'm in fear of new information, doesn't want to look at anything, willingly wants to remain ignorant, running headlong into her own enslavement. Truly unbelievable. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back. That was our last break for this installment of What on Earth is Happening. So we have another about 25 minutes, and going to be going to calls in a moment. We were talking about the denial, hassle, ridicule factor, specifically denial, and the willing refusal to progress toward truth by seeking knowledge and to and confronting information, just basically taking information into oneself. How many people outrightly refuse to do that in fear of what they may find? We were talking about the End the Fed rally, how certain people took the information we had to present to them with a humble attitude, knowing that they did not know, and with a little bit of human curiosity, if you could imagine that, and took it and thanked us and said, yes, I'll look into this. And that's wonderful, and I think there needs to be a lot more of that. I do believe that they were in the minority, but we gave out a lot of information. I mean, a lot of people did take this. As a ratio, they were definitely the minority. More people refused the info and scoffed at the people who were on the march because they feel that this is some form of invalid behavior. That you cannot protest against things that you don't like that are going on in your world. That's off limits. How dare you? How dare you not sit back and be a good little slave and go along with the program of your masters? How dare you? This is how we police each other. When people like that were attempted to be given information, they had this snide, almost cocky look on their face as if, you're trying to give me information like I don't already know what's going on in the world, and you somehow are aware of something I'm not? Yeah, as if they knew everything. They knew everything there is to know, and there's nothing that could possibly be brought to their attention that could possibly affect their lives. The denial factor, totally based in fear. Let's go to our first caller from New Jersey. You're on What on Earth is Happening? What do you have for us?
Hi, Mark. It's Chris. How are you doing?
Chris, how are you? Always a pleasure to hear from you.
Mark, first of all, I want to congratulate you on that speech at the End the Fed rally. That was terrific. I love the way you tied in the imagination theme to the End the Fed rally. If we can't imagine a world without the Fed, we can't create the world without the Fed. So that was very good. I also
That's
give you a lot
right.
of credit.
I'll be posting that to my website later this week, probably in the next day or two. I'll put the video up there. It's on YouTube. If you search Mark Passio and the Fed Rally Philly, that should come up on YouTube. But I'll post a link to it on my website in my news section this week, probably with a transcript of the actual speech. So thanks, Chris.
Yeah, I won't take much more time, but I do want to say that Einstein said that condemnation without investigation is the height of ignorance. And
yes.
that's a very true statement. And when you're trying to help people in their consciousness, you have to get used to, as in my experience, you have to get used to denial and rejection. And maybe over time they'll come around. Because I was in the End the Fed rally, and I experienced the same thing you did in terms of rejection and chosen ignorance, as far as I'm concerned.
Right. Yeah, you saw that a lot. I mean. Yeah. People who are refusing the information seem very much, at least in my perception, to be trapped in this false political paradigm, this false left-right paradigm. You heard people either saying, "Oh, these are right-wingers," or "Oh, these are left-wing socialist types that want to do away with our economic system." And
I give you a lot of credit, Mark. I watched you hand out
stereotypes, unfortunately. Go ahead, Chris.
No, I give you a lot of credit. I watched you handing out those flyers for a long time. You did a great job on that. There weren't a lot of people there, I guess, overall with the End of the Fed rally, but the people who were there were very principled and courageous and trying to help other people, whether they wanted to be helped or not, but not forcibly helping them, just offering a hand and saying, here's some information, and maybe if you're interested, go look into it. And the last thing I'll say, because I know there's probably other callers, is the fight of waking people up, and that's basically what we were doing with the End of the Fed, and just in a focused way, is I think it's portrayed really well in the movie They Live, where the fight scene was indicative of how people will hold on through fear, I guess, to their ignorance.
That's right. The philosopher Deleuze once said that he asked the question, why do people fight as stubbornly for their enslavement as they do for their salvation, as they should for their salvation? You know, and it's incredibly true. You know, we're fighting more for our enslavement than we are for anything else, for our freedom, for our, understanding to greater levels of, coming to an understanding of greater levels of knowledge. People don't seem to want those things. They seem to want the big daddy state, the nanny state. They seem to want to remain ignorant. And, Thomas Jefferson replied to that. He said, if a nation expects to remain ignorant in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and what never will be.
Yeah,
ignorance and freedom do not go hand in hand. They are diametrically opposed to each other.
I'm going to go, but one last thing. I think a lot of it's due to fear. They're choosing fear over love. And the other thing is, David Icke said that the biggest obstacle holding most people in lower consciousness is worrying about what other people think. So I'll let you go, Mark.
That's
Thanks
right.
so much. Great show.
You got it. We're going to get to that factor in a moment. I'll try to basically get through the hassle and ridicule factors in the remainder of the show. So we talked about denial and cognitive dissonance. Let's look at, cognitive dissonance is basically lying to yourself and, holding two contradictory things in your mind simultaneously. George Orwell called this doublethink. You could believe that black is black and that black is also white. Okay? People who believe that, 9/11 was done by 19 Muslim hijackers when in fact they can see the buildings falling at free fall speed, understanding that Muslim hijackers couldn't possibly have put demolition charges in buildings that came down at the speed of gravity, are in doublethink. They're in cognitive dissonance. Their senses are telling them one thing, but their mind is telling them, since that's impossible, you must accept the alternative to that, which is the official government fairy tale. And they do that willingly, like trained sheep. They just go right along with that programming because the alternative is too horrible to contemplate for them. Fear. Again, I've heard people say, I don't care if the government came out and openly claimed that they killed all of those people deliberately. I would still choose not to believe in it. Imagine that. If people openly admitted that this is what we did, that they said if proof came out and the people who did it were actually acknowledged that they had done it, they would still choose to believe that it was done the way the official story said because they want to live in that world rather than the one that would actually be have that horrible scenario of insiders and different agencies within the government having done this to their own people. I mean, that's as sick as you can get psychologically as far as I'm concerned. That's willful denial of truth. And for somebody to say they're willing to enter that condition, that's a sick human being. That's like saying, I'm so afraid that 2 + 2 = 4 that I will choose to believe that it equals 5 and live my life accordingly rather than face the actual truth that it does in fact equal 4. That's how crazy that is. That's totally right-brained imbalance because of fear. As Chris mentioned, I'd like to also say, he mentioned David Icke. I'd like to also say another great thing David Icke brought up is we have to begin our journey and investigation into the truth with a blank sheet of paper. If we bring our preconceived notions to it, the information that we encounter is all going to be colored by that preconceived notion, and we're going to try to squeeze it into a little box. We bring preconceived religious notions to it. Everything that we find in our pursuit of truth has to be squeezed into that box of religion. If we bring our scientific preconceived notions to it, everything that we find in pursuit of truth, no matter how much it goes against that preconceived notion, has to be squeezed into that box. Because that's all of these conditioning factors when it comes to religion or politics or the New Age movement or science or any other form of mind control. That's all they are. They're boxes for consciousness. That's it. It's saying anything that's within this box is valid and anything that's outside of it is off limits for human consumption and consideration. And that's simply not true. The truth is too big to be confined to any system or any box for consciousness. It exists outside that box. As a matter of fact, the truth contains that box, everything inside it and everything outside of it. And it can never be squeezed down into a nice, neat little package. It doesn't work that way. But try telling that to somebody who's in this state of cognitive dissonance. The other factor that Chris brought up was that we basically are afraid of what other people think of us. That's why we won't look at certain things. This is the ridicule factor. I would rather stay silent than actually start to bring up things that make people a little bit uncomfortable because it challenges their preconceived conditioned notions of reality. And I would rather not take any action, not raise my voice, not say what I feel to be true, because I'm more in fear of what other people may think of me for doing that. Now imagine how much of a low state of fear-based consciousness you need to be in to think that way. That's also always based in fear. That's it. You have to be in fear of another person's opinion, another person's opinion of you. We need to get outside of that barrier to truth. We need to break down that wall that we're erecting on our own. No one else is building that wall but us. How many people are actually talking about this stuff to other people? And, I would critically say not enough. Okay? Because if they were, more people would be aware and start to look into this on their own. There are many people out there that could be inspired to search for the truth on their own terms, if only more people in their lives would start to bring information of this sort to them by speaking it. I've often said, and I put this in almost every one of my mailings that I send out on my mailing list to people, the truth is spoken into existence. If we are in fear of what other people are going to think about us, we're going to make that stop us from speaking our truth into the world. And therefore, we're also basically helping to build the prison that we're going to have to live in as a result. We need to use our courage to break down that divide, to break down that barrier to speaking the truth. The reason that the dominators, the occultists of the world, are so successful in what they are doing, the dark occultists, are so successful in what they are doing, and the manipulation tactics that they enact, that they control the world through. The reason that they're so successful is because they never stop speaking their view of reality into the world. They have a device that does it 24 hours a day. It's called television. And they're constantly telling you their vision of reality and putting that vision into your mind, getting you to live in their fantasy world, in their dream, enact their dream, and make their reality come true. They're telling you a vision. That's why it's called television. That's green language. That's alchemical green language. And most people never see that, never think of it in that term, even though they hear it constantly. They're always using their voice. They're not divided. I've said this before. People hate when I bring this up and talk about it. They don't want to hear this, but I'll keep saying it. The reason they're successful, and we're not, is because they're united and we're not. Largely. There are some of us who are, but nowhere near enough of us are on the same page and doing the same work. And so many of these manipulators are on the same page and doing the same work. They're acting as one overarching mastermind. And because they think, feel, and act in unison, they're getting their desires manifested. Because we are in opposition consciousness and we are not thinking, feeling, and acting in unison, we're not getting what we want. We're not receiving the manifestation of our desires. We need to change more people's minds and hearts through courage and inspiration and knowledge such that they start to speak the reality that they want to create into existence. And you can't do that until you put your voice out there, and you can't put your voice out there unless you know enough and have enough courage to not care what anybody else thinks about what you're going to put out there. You have to do it because you know it's the right thing to do. And that's why I respect David Icke so much, as Chris mentioned him. I respect him. He's one of the first people I dedicate my presentation series to, because no matter what anybody thought of what that man was saying, he kept saying it because he felt it to be true and right. And he always said, if you don't feel it to be true and right, you leave what you don't feel is right and you take what you will and do with it what you will. He knows that information needs to be shared widely and freely and put out there with no fear. And that's why I have a tremendous amount of respect for his courage. And that's why he's an inspiration to me for what I do. And we need more people in the world like that. Everything about this method of manipulation all has to do with fear. Each one of these things, denial is psychological fear. The ridicule factor, is fear of speaking your truth. And then the hassle factor is fear of taking right action in the world that you know you should be taking. Once you have a certain level of awareness, this is where a lot of people who do know the truth are trapped. See? This is the hardest one to overcome, the hassle factor. When you know something is wrong in the world and you want to start doing what is right, but the dominators, the people who actually live evil into existence, who are actually taking all the actions of evil so that they're bringing a more chaotic world into existence, whether they're doing this knowingly, which some of them are, of smaller percentage, or whether they're doing this because they're in oppositional consciousness and they're under mind control. They're trying to stop people from actually doing the right things in life and saying, you can't do this, you can't speak, you can't take this action that you have every right to take. And people sit back, see that they're willing to enact violence upon people for doing certain things that they have every right to do. And people back off because they say, I'm unwilling to deal with that hassle. I want to be in the hassle-free zone. I don't want to have any dealings with the police. I don't want to have any dealings with the government. I don't want to have any dealings with quote-unquote authority figures. All based in fear. People who won't come out to a rally. I know so many people personally that won't come out to an End the Fed rally because they're so afraid of what that might mean. They might be on some list for their activities or what they're promoting. There are special places in hell reserved for people with that kind of fear because they know what's going on. They know. And yet they still choose not to act because of their fear. And guess what? That's the last place I'd ever want to be. That's the last mode of consciousness I would ever want to dwell in. Because that means you have completely abdicated your personal responsibility in a state of awareness of it. All I have to say is woe to people like that. You don't even understand what you're bringing down upon the higher self, your higher self, or if you want to use the term, your soul. And I'll openly say that to somebody. I don't care who they are. If you know and you're not acting, worst place you could possibly ever want to be in or stay in. And it's because you've taken the step and conquered the fear of knowing, and you've said, I want to know. I no longer am in the fear that keeps me trapped in ignorance. But then you've chosen a new level of fear, a new barrier that's based in fear, and that's non-action. And like I said, I think that abdicates even more responsibility than simply remaining in ignorance willfully. Staying in the non-hassle zone, the hassle-free zone, is actually a greater abdication of responsibility than remaining in denial. See, the people who want to remain in denial, they want to remain there because they can cop out and say, well, I didn't really know. I never really looked into that for myself. So I didn't need to take any action on it because I never really understood. So it's all also based in a denial of personal responsibility, in an abdication of personal responsibility. You know, the ridicule factor, it's also based in that I don't even want to start speaking because of my fear of what someone else may think. And in saying back from that, they're copping out again. They're giving away their personal responsibility by saying, hey, if I speak this, what I feel is true, what I may even know to be true, I may be ridiculed by somebody else who doesn't have the same information, and they're going to say, oh, you're some kind of a crazy conspiracy theorist or whatever. Okay? So that's another level of fear that we encounter. So it's the fear of knowing, then the fear of speaking, and finally the hassle zone, the fear of acting. All horrible modes of consciousness to be trapped in and to stay trapped in. But I would say the worst is the hassle-free zone, because those people who remain in there, they know deeply what's going on, and they know what needs to be done about it. They know the right action to take, and they're willfully refusing to act based upon what they know. And what that is, that's not only an abdication of personal responsibility, that is a pure shunning of wisdom, which is the goddess principle, the sacred feminine. That is basically the destruction of the goddess herself. And again, this is symbolism. This is the divine feminine aspect of the self. I'm not talking about an actual being. Okay? You are cremating, ultimately, the sacred feminine component of your own self. Because by putting down the male element of action, okay, you are killing your conscience. Because conscience is the knowing of what is right. And that is what compels you to act in a moral way in the world. So this is part of what is ritualistically enacted in the cremation of care ceremony at Bohemian Grove each year in the California Redwoods. It's killing care, which is killing the sacred feminine aspect of consciousness, which ultimately results in not taking proper moral action in the world. This ultimately sums it all up. This is what the denial, hassle, ridicule factor is all about. The denial factor is staying in psychological denial, psychological state of refusal to accept truth, even though you can basically see it, even at a conscious level. The hassle factor, the ridicule factor, is all about not speaking your truth into the world for fear of what other people may think of you. And then the hassle factor